This part 1 video discusses the decades-long conspiracy to hurt the credibility of God's true church and the utmost importance of each church having its own publications to explain its fundamental beliefs to its members and the public at large. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. The reason why I wish to discuss the importance of each church having its own publications to explain its beliefs to its members and the public at large is that there is a diabolical plot being carried out to hurt the credibility of God's church by forces outside the church, infiltrators in the church who have since left and become dissidents, and some former leaders who have joined the German masqueraders side in an attempt to save their skin during the soon coming great catastrophes. First, a very brief history of God's church. Modern era of God's church was founded by God through Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, or HWA, and was known as the Worldwide Church of God, or WCG, during his days. We believe he was sent by God in the spirit and power of Elijah the prophet, as stated in Malachi 4 verses 5 to 6. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse or utter destruction. So Mr. Armstrong was sent to restore all things, as stated in Matthew 17 verse 11. And Jesus answered and said unto them, that is the disciples, Elijah truly shall come first and restore all things. Restoring all things means reinstituting the fundamental beliefs, doctrines, and truths of the church and worshipping God the way he requires that he be worshipped. When Mr. Armstrong passed away on January 16, 1986, he had restored knowledge of the true doctrines and truths to God's church. But after his passing away, the man he had appointed as his successor, Joseph W. Tkach Sr., turned out to be an infiltrator or tear planted in the church by Satan. Within 3 years of Mr. Armstrong's passing away, he began changing doctrines till he had completely done away with what God had restored through Mr. Armstrong. Those who still wanted to adhere to what Mr. Armstrong taught had no choice but to separate from the Worldwide Church of God and set up their own organizations. Unfortunately, different leaders and members left at different times, and all did not agree on who the leader should be. Therefore, some leaders set up their own separate church organizations and drew members to them. The first major split occurred in 1989 when Gerald Flurry was disfellowshipped by the Worldwide Church. He set up the Philadelphia Church of God. Another split occurred in 1993 under the leadership of Roderick Meredith, who formed the Global Church of God. That church split further after Meredith was removed as leader, and he formed the Living Church of God in late 1998. A further major split occurred in 1995 from the Worldwide Church, when a large number of evangelists and ministers formed the United Church of God. In May 1999, Minister David Pack was fired from the Global Church of God. He set up his own separate organization, the Restored Church of God. In 2010, the United split up with about 1/3 of the ministers and members leaving to form Church of God, a worldwide association. So besides these larger splinter groups, other small groups also separated from the Worldwide Church of God at different times and formed their own groups. All these organizations claim to follow what Mr. Armstrong taught, but some differences have developed. Some of the leaders have claimed titles such as prophet or apostle, which others don't recognize. Mr. Armstrong appointed Joseph Tkach Sr. as his successor. He was not a scholar and relied on his son Joseph Tkach Jr. for doctrinal support. Both of them, with their other assistants, began making changes to the doctrines and practices introduced by Mr. Armstrong quite soon after taking over in 1986. To justify their changes, they had to criticize Mr. Armstrong. Their attack was two-pronged. They first began to state that Mr. Armstrong was not trained in hermeneutics, therefore his interpretations of the Bible were not accurate, which is the reason he got his understanding of Christian doctrines wrong. Secondly, they accused Mr. Armstrong of copying the main ideas for his most important and most requested book by the public, United States and Britain and Prophecy, from another author, J.H. Allen's book, Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright. A former management school colleague made a statement that describes how people like the Tkachers act when they try to bring down the opposition. When there is nothing to show by way of your own accomplishments, or resort to false propaganda about the opposition. The Tkachers had absolutely no achievements to their credit throughout their lives, but used false propaganda against Mr. Armstrong to discredit what God had restored through him. No one who came into God's church through Mr. Armstrong's preaching took the Tkachers seriously for their first criticism, including me, that Mr. Armstrong had no training in hermeneutics, which means principles of Bible interpretation. Many among us were well educated with PhD and MA degrees and knew that Mr. Armstrong was a self-taught man and was a first-class researcher and historian. Moreover, all the PhDs in theology and mainstream Christianity who have all the training in hermeneutics, despite all their lifelong learning and study of the Bible, could not come to the knowledge of the truth. God called Mr. Armstrong to his work to specifically reveal the truths to him, which he then restored to God's church. As far as the Tkachers' second criticism is concerned, here is where their diabolical intentions were exposed. Tkach Jr. started criticizing Mr. Armstrong for having copied the main ideas for his book, United States and Britain and Prophecy, from J.H. Allen's book. Soon after, they started changing the church's doctrines more than 3 decades ago. I decided to check it out for myself about 20 to 25 years ago and read Allen's book, Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright. I did find that the basic ideas that British and American people are the descendants of the tribe of Joseph, and the British royal family is descended from the line of King David, were the same as in Allen's book. But Mr. Armstrong had done a thorough job of researching the subject in greater depth and presenting the material lucidly and logically. In addition, J.H. Allen had no idea about prophecies for the future. Mr. Armstrong's main purpose in writing the book was to fulfill his commission to the world as stated in Matthew 24, verse 11. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness or warning or testimony unto all nations, and then shall the end come. According to Bible prophecies, establishment of God's kingdom will be preceded by global catastrophes, particularly for the British, American, and Jewish people. Mr. Armstrong was called by God to issue that warning to them as well as the entire world. Revealing the identity of these peoples had to be the starting point for his warning for it to be effective, because Bible's main prophecies concern these peoples. That's why Mr. Armstrong wrote his book. He incorporated all the prophecies for the future in his book, which J.H. Allen had no clue about. Moreover, I knew that Allen's book was not new knowledge, which the Tkachers made it out to be in their criticism. He wrote the first edition of his book in 1902. I knew that the British royal historians had the knowledge that the British and American people are descendants of Joseph, and that the royal family is descended from Kings David and Solomon since the early to mid 1850s. That is 50 to 70 years before Allen wrote his book. So this was not new knowledge. While doing his research, Mr. Armstrong may have read Allen's book as well as the books, booklets, and articles by British historians. All authors who write ancient history have to do that. They have to get their facts from what ancient historians or historians before their time have written, just as Allen did, and H.W.A. would have done. But Mr. Armstrong added many new insights from his own research, just as Allen would have done. But Mr. Armstrong was the man who understood prophecy better than any man in human history except Jesus Christ. The reason is that prophecies were sealed till the time of the end, as states Daniel 12 verses 4 and 8 to 9. But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O Lord God, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed at the time of the end. According to this prophecy, we will recognize the time of the end when many shall run to and fro, meaning a time of global travel, and a time when knowledge will explode. Clearly, ours is the only time that fulfills these conditions. All these Bible prophecies were revealed to Mr. Armstrong for the first time in human history. He incorporated all that understanding in his book. All modern historians of ancient history have to get their facts about ancient history from what others have written about their times. Then the modern historian collates the facts gleaned from various sources and reinterprets them using his own insights. That's what Mr. Armstrong did. He did not copy his book from Allen's book. The Takaches and their associates were not conducting the project to slander Mr. Armstrong on their own. They had the help of as many German masquerader historians as they needed to mount their false propaganda. The effort was well organized. Unfortunately, I did not retain my copy of J.H. Allen's book I read 20 to 25 years ago, so I downloaded a copy from the internet a few days ago and skimmed through it. To my utter surprise, this was not the same book I read decades ago. The latest version had all the material that Mr. Armstrong's book had. This means the latest version was a doctored version of the old one. All the material in Mr. Armstrong's book had been recently added to the new version of Allen's book. The German masqueraders had taken off all copies of Allen's 1902 edition of the book off the internet and made only their doctored version available. Of course, since I no longer had the old version, I could not verify the changes made, but others have already verified and confirmed that the latest version was doctored to incorporate all material in Mr. Armstrong's book so that they could provide it as evidence that Mr. Armstrong copied material from Allen's book. Now, German masqueraders inside or outside God's church are not interested in the truth. They will use any form of half-truths and cunningly devised lies to slander people and those doing God's work, because they are Satan worshippers and enemies of God and His truth. Since Mr. Armstrong did God's work, he became their target after his death. Since I'm doing God's work, I know I have not escaped being targeted by them. That's why I need to defend the church's work and its publications. Incidentally, God's true church since its beginning in 31 AD has always been called Church of God. Joseph Takach Jr. long ago changed the name of the Worldwide Church of God to Grace Communion International to make sure that it can no longer be identified with God's true church in any way. That's how viciously he and those around him went about their task of trying to destroy God's true church. Though Joseph Takach Jr. has retired from active ministry and as head of the Grace Communion International, he is still engaged in the efforts to discredit me and Mr. Armstrong in any way he can, along with others whom I will identify in this series of videos. Before I discuss what additional role Joseph Takach Jr. played in trying to destroy God's church, first a brief history of why I started writing books on ancient history and religion. I am a lay member in God's United Church of God, but I became known in the United States in 1990 because of my statements during the First Gulf War. At that time, Satan seems to have advised the Germans that I have been appointed to the office of a prophet, which they shared with the world. That made me well known. More than a decade and a half passed without anyone in God's church asking me to preach about prophecy. As already stated, the German masquerader and infiltrator head of God's Church, Joseph Tkach Sr. and his son Joseph Tkach Jr. took over the church and tried to stick the label of a terror on me in an attempt to drive me away from God's Church. I had no idea to start a blog or any other way to preach the Christ gospel message and without prophecy, because it could get me disfellowshipped from the church, and I was a mere lay member. What credibility would I have? Moreover, senior leaders were already doing the job of preaching the gospel. It seems Satan then told the Germans that they cannot start the Third World War because preaching of the warning message was not complete and that I had to preach it. People rarely communicate with me directly, but only through signals. I kept getting strong signals to start preaching, but I feared being disfellowshipped. Finally, in September 2006, I took courage and started a blog. Nobody in the church asked me to stop or threatened me with being disfellowshipped, so I continued. Then the idea came to me. Satan and the demons had been broadcasting my thoughts at least since 2000 and 2001. I got the idea to write weekly messages and read them aloud on Sunday mornings. Satan and the demons would then broadcast them as they are broadcasting my thoughts anyway. I delivered my first message on December 2, 2006. To everyone's surprise, the message was broadcast. Since then, I have not missed a single weekly message. I actually completed all my messages on prophecy on July 14, 2007. I wondered if my job was done, but United Church of God leaders told me to continue. Moreover, a change occurred. Satan and the demons stopped broadcasting my messages. Satan confirmed that to the Germans. Since July 21, 2007, God's angels have been broadcasting them. If anyone wants to hear these weekly messages delivered every Saturday morning at 9 a.m., he just has to tune his ear to hear them, and he will hear them in his own language. Now, I've been fully responsible for the content of the messages I was preaching. I began to feel that the church's literature was leaving out some very important information concerning ancient history and the origins of humanity's religious traditions and problems. There were also some gaps in understanding of ancient history. My interest in researching ancient history had been piqued in 1984 when my church pastor gave a sermon explaining that Abraham was a great scientist, mathematician, and astronomer of his day, whereas I thought that he was a nomad living in tents. He quoted the ancient Jewish historian Josephus for his information. I immediately bought the book, complete works of Josephus and other Bible commentaries and dictionaries. I had heard sermons on the pagan origins of Christmas and Easter and the book The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop, who was cited as a source for the information. Then the local pastor in my church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin decided to start a small group library of religious books, yet a couple of shelves full, donated by members. I was able to check out some of those books and read them. So I read books on evolution, true history of God's true church, and how the Sabbath was changed from Saturday to Sunday, and other subjects. I also obtained reprints of articles that various church authors had written about ancient history and church publications and other materials. Ancient history sometimes discussed in sermons and Bible studies, taped copies of which were also available. To incorporate up-to-date research in my messages, in 2007, I decided to do my own research on ancient history. I took a guest membership at the local University of South Florida library for $50, which allowed me to check out 50 books at a time. I found that the library was surprisingly well stocked with books on ancient history. In addition, a great deal of information was also available on the internet. Thus, I was able to obtain books on what ancient historians Diodorus of Sicily, Manetho of Egypt, and Berosus of Babylon had written about times and characters that lived in pre-flood and immediate post-flood times. famous archaeologists had written books and copied ancient king lists and the lengths of reigns, also and the important deeds attributed to them. The book was also available on the travels of Noah in Europe, which had been digitized. Much of ancient pre-flood and immediate post-flood history had been mythologized. A great deal of information was available in books and on the internet on Greek, Roman, and Egyptian mythology. Diodorus had already figured out that the mythical gods were mere humans who had deified themselves. These mythical gods should be identified with various famous men and women in the Bible based on their characteristics. This enabled more ancient history to be reconstructed. I had decided to conduct my own research to use in my weekly message and had no thought of writing a book on ancient history. But as my research materials accumulated, I felt it could be organized and presented in a book. It resulted in 2 volumes on ancient history from biblical perspective, Satan versus God, volumes 1 and 2. I also found drawbacks in the church's literature on some other important topics concerning its belief. First, I found in the ancient history information that showed how the struggle to pervert the true religion preached by Noah and his son Shem was missing from the literature. Secondly, all literature was written from a Christian perspective. Being from a previous Hindu and Sikh background, I knew that most Christians would simply not read literature written entirely from a Christian perspective. They simply treat it as Christian propaganda, which is what I did when I started my own research into religion at age 15. Therefore, perspective of all major religions of the world needed to be reflected in a literature. I had that perspective, which none of the other leaders in God's church had. After God's church split into many different splinter groups, each had its own booklet on major topics. However, none of the books and booklets were incorporating all the best material on a subject. In its booklets, each church organization avoided including what others had written. The result has been insipid books on such subjects. One has to reach 4 to 5 booklets to obtain all the best material on a subject to get a full understanding of a subject. So, of certain subjects that I were not well covered, I decided to write my own comprehensive e-books like textbooks on the subject, incorporating all material of importance, whether any church booklet had it or not. That, in short, is the history of how my 2 ancient history books and all my e-books on my religion website came to be written. These shortcomings in the literature are entirely new e-books. I felt I needed to write based on my own research. Led me to develop some rules for writing e-books, taking into account the special requirements of religion. The unique requirement of all denominations of Christianity is that each of them believes that they have the truth, whereas other denominations don't, and salvation is only through their religion. Roman Catholics believe that there is the only one true God and that salvation is only through their church, which means you have to be a member of their church to go to heaven. Protestants believe that Catholicism is the devil's religion and that salvation is only for Christians who hold their beliefs and practice Christianity as taught by them. Beliefs of other church denominations are similar. No one joins a church if he believes the church does not have the truth. God's church believes that salvation is only through God's true church, though most of humanity will qualify for it, but every human being on his own order. However, before they qualify, they must become a member of God's true church. In fact, God's kingdom, every human being will become a member of God's true church, as nothing else will be allowed to be taught. Now, God's church believes that Jesus Christ is returning to earth very soon. But before he returns, humanity will experience unprecedented global catastrophes in a 3.5-year-long Great Tribulation, in which much of the world's population will be destroyed. However, God promises protection from these catastrophes in a place called safety. Because you've kept the word of my patient, I also will keep all the world to try them and dwell upon the earth. Those members of his true church who remain loyal to him to the end and continue to persevere in preaching the gospel as a warning to the catastrophes, followed by a wonderful return of Jesus Christ to take over the kingdoms of the world and solve all of humanity's problems. These members are characterized as Philadelphians. Other members of God's church who were lukewarm in doing God's work will not be protected through the Great Tribulation and will be persecuted. These members are called Laodiceans in Revelation 3 verses 14 to 22. Beginning in verse 15, I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either cold or hot. However, if money remains loyal to God to the end enough through all the persecutions, all death if needed, they will qualify for salvation, which is eternal life in God's kingdom. Since God split into many organizations after Mr. Armstrong passing away in 1986, two of the splinters, the PCG headed by Gerald Flurry and the RCG headed by David Pack, teach that they are the only true Philadelphians after the splits, and all members are Laodiceans. To be labeled a Laodicean is to be branded as inferior, lukewarm Christian. Since they claim that they are the only Philadelphians, each of them claims that to receive protection in a place of safety during the Great Tribulation, one has to be a member of their organization. All others will have to go through the Great Tribulation with its unprecedented religious persecution. God's church believes that the rest of humanity who are not members of God's church will go through the Great Tribulation. Now, I belong to the United Church of God, the largest in the groups that split from the worldwide church. According to Gerald Flurry of the PCG, since I am not a member of the WCG, since I'm not a member of the PCG, I am a Laodicean and will not be protected in the place of safety and will have to go through the Great Tribulation. David Pack of the RCG believes that only members of the RCG, and I am a Laodicean and will also not be protected. He also believes that Gerald Flurry of the PCG is not a true prophet, and all members of the PCG are also Laodiceans. They too will not be protected during the Great Tribulation. Now, I have written an e-booklet titled Tale of the False Prophet and Fake Apostle, in which I have described why the leader of the PCG is a false prophet and the leader of the RCG is a fake apostle. These are top-ranking titles in church hierarchy, which these two leaders have turned for themselves. These men have gone rogue and turned against God's true church, though they still claim they are the only true Philadelphians or part of the Church of God. I will explain this in greater detail in a later video. But suffice to say that they, along with JTJ and about 20 to 25 leading ministers in various Church of God organizations, are now in the vanguard to hurt my credibility as much as possible, because I am doing God's work as Mr. Armstrong was doing. Here then is the dilemma that leaders in various Church of God organizations that came out of the WCG face. Leaders of the PCG and RCG preach all other churches of God except their own are Laodicean and have compromised with the truth that God restored through HWA. Therefore, they teach their congregation that they should not read the literature of any other Church of God organization except their own or any other mainstream Christian denomination such as Catholicism or Protestant, as they will be led astray. For the same reason, I now advise that the PCG and RCG are leading genuine members astray and are in fact engaged in genuinely doing harm to genuine members. Therefore, genuine members should avoid reading their literature. Asking their congregations to not read religious literature of other churches is a standard practice of all Christian denominations. The reason is that each of them believes that they have all the truth, whereas others have some error in their teaching, some more, some less. If any of their members read the literature of another denomination, they are likely to be led astray. The result would be a loss of salvation. Therefore, in their sincerest thinking, church leaders and local congregation pastors counsel their members to turn literature in any other religious organization than its own. This underscores the necessity for each Christian denomination and Church of God organization to have its own literature on all doctrines and subjects that it teaches its members and the public. Now, each Church of God organization publishing its own literature on each topic poses certain challenges. First, we must be clear that all true doctrines and teachings were restored to God's church by God through Mr. Armstrong. After Mr. Armstrong's death in 1986 and the death of Joseph W. Tkach Sr., who succeeded him in 1995, his son George Jr. became head of the WCG. In 1998 to 1999, he and his advisors sought to destroy all that HWA had written. They asked all members to send in all the copies of any old church publications they had because they said they wanted to achieve HWA's writing for future generations. Now, after the members had sent in all the literature they had, TJL and other associates made a bonfire of all that was on them. After that violent incident, various Church of God leaders asked David Pack to set up a separate organization and start printing and distributing all of HWA's literature. The reason was that he had been close to Mr. Armstrong. However, because of copyright laws, he could not do that. Therefore, he rewrote all of HWA's booklets and books to preserve all that HWA taught. There was nothing unusual in what DCP wrote. His mandate was to expire what HWA taught. All the information regarding HWA was well known by members of the church and had been expounded in sermons and Bible course studies for 5 to 6 hours. Just as the Tkachs accused Mr. Armstrong of copying material from J.H. Allen's book, one could oppose J.H. Allen of copying from HWA. But this commission was to preserve what HWA taught, since enemies of the truth were working diligently to destroy it. He went a very good job, but none of what he wrote was original. It was all taught by HWA. All RCG members and all potential members interested in joining the RCG must have all that literature and what HWA taught available to them. RCG cannot offer prospective members to publications of another Church of God organization such as PCG, UCG, LCG, or COGWA, especially when it considers those organizations to be dissidents, Laodiceans, or false true Christianity. After a court fight, the PCG obtained the copyrights to some key books and booklets written by HWA. Since the restored Church of God considers Gerald Flurry of the Philadelphia Church to be a false prophet and that church to be Laodicean, the RCG cannot refer to prospective members to PCG to read what HWA had written. That's why RCG has to virtually duplicate what HWA had written in its own literature. Similarly, the UCG cannot refer its members and prospective members to RCG and PCG websites and their publications to study various subjects. It must also have its own publications on each subject and doctrine. All these publications must contain mainly information that Mr. Armstrong taught and did not offer in any course from what he taught, because we believe that the truth was restored through him. However, these publications may contain information that provides additional understanding on a subject from the scriptures, but when the overall doctrine is established by H.W.A. Again, if one accuses someone of copying in material form someone else's booklet, then all Church of God organizations are doing so, copying from H.W.A. But it is clear that one cannot copyright ideas and main folds on a subject. As explained, it is an absolute necessity. It is essential for protecting its members from being led astray by what it considers false Christianity or false religion and lose their salvation according to its core beliefs. Another very important manner to keep in mind is that members want to get their information on topics dealt with by secular researchers only from their own religious leaders. Consider information on evolution. All Church of God organizations have booklets on the subject, yet none of the writers are experts on evolution. They have gathered material on evolution published by secular scientists and included it in their books. David Pack is an expert on evolution, yet he has written a booklet on the subject without quoting much from scientists. He just takes material from other sources, and DCP is copying material from other sources. But I'm not concerned about such allegations. Number 4. The important issue is that lay members, even if they had a science background, don't want to get information on evolution from secular scientists or other religions who may have differing views on the subject. They trust information only from their own religious leaders because they would have written the booklet taking into account the church's beliefs and filtered all the information available with other sources with the filter of God's core beliefs. I hope this explains the absolute necessity for all religions to have their own publications on various church choices. That's why I felt I had to write some of my own ebooks and e-booklets. In the next couple of videos, I will discuss more examples of men whose actions could destroy members who pay heed to what they say, which again underscores the absolute necessity for each church to have its own religious literature. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. Some people do not have the time to go through the full length of videos. They find it more convenient to read the text of the video. Unfortunately, YouTube does not provide the capability to make the text of my videos available on YouTube. But fortunately, Facebook does provide that capacity. So I make the text of my videos available on my Facebook channel, which you can easily copy.